Greetings, and welcome to Etz Chaim's weekly podcast, recorded live in Richardson, Texas. We invite you now to join us for one of our synagogue's Shabbat messages.
Well, Shabbat Shalom. It's great to be here with you. For those of you who don't know me, I was just introduced, but my name is Michael Gabizon, and I am married to Hannah Gabizon back there. And we've been married for about 3 years now, and Hannah is actually 17 months pregnant. So we're expecting our firstborn, which is 17 weeks. 17 weeks pregnant. I'm glad she's not 17 months pregnant. It would be an issue. As was said, I was born and raised in Montreal. Both my parents are Jewish believers who accept Yeshua, Jesus, as the Messiah. My father came from Morocco. He was born and raised there. Then because of the persecution, came to Montreal. And my mother, her family comes from Poland. So they would say that us kids should be called Marco Polo for Morocco and Poland. Either way, I work for Ariel Ministries, as was said, and I go to school full-time at Dallas Theological Seminary, where I'm getting my THM degree, my Master's of Theology. Now, before I went to Dallas Theological Seminary, I actually was at Moody Bible Institute in Chicago, where I met Hannah, and I was in the Jewish Studies program there. And I graduated in 2010, and that's when I got married to Hannah, and that's when I signed on with Ariel Ministries, and I decided to take a year off and just to do ministry full time. I was fairly convinced I knew all there was to know about Jewish ministry. Little did I know at that time. And so in 2011, as I was going through my year, about a quarter of the way in, I got an email from a religious cousin of mine. He's a Chabadnik, and he lives in Australia, and he sent me an article, Why Jesus is Not the Messiah. And I thought, oh, okay, this is going to be fun. This is what we do in the Jewish Studies program. So I opened the letter and I was able to discuss, Isaiah 7:14, the virgin birth, Alma Petula, all these arguments. And I sent it off and I was half expecting him to respond and say, I believe. Thank you. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. What happened was he sent my article to my response to the person who wrote the original article, and we began dialoguing. And that began about an 8-month dialogue. And little did I know that I was actually speaking with a professional anti-missionary. And for those of you who don't know, anti-missionaries are people who try to deprogram Jewish people who believe in Jesus. And I realized I had a very limited knowledge because, he would write to me and I would take about 2.5 hours to write back. And then within 20 minutes, I would see his response. And I was thinking, I'm losing this battle. He was bringing up objections, theological, emotional, cultural, historical. I just didn't know what to do with them. And I found myself, after a couple of months, really beginning to doubt, where do I stand? Do I still believe that Yeshua is a Messiah, even though I can't answer all of these objections? And I started to have sleepless nights. And I remember I came to a fork in the road. Where am I going to continue pursuing the answers? Am I going to continue fighting for this and searching, even though I have a heavy heart? Or am I just going to give up and, declare I don't know or go to Judaism or whatever it may be? And that's a fairly similar situation to what the people in the book of Hebrews were dealing with when the author wrote the letter to them. See, the people in the book of Hebrews were dealing with one of the first generations of believers in Messiah. And they're joining this new sect. They're believing that Yeshua, this man Jesus, is the Messiah, and yet they're being persecuted for their faith. And they get to a point where they're saying, is it worth it? Is Jesus really the Messiah? Is it worth it for me to continue on going? And the author of the book of Hebrews is saying, absolutely it is. And he explains why. So if you have a Bible, let's open up to the book of Hebrews. And if you're like me, sitting in class quite a bit, it's kind of easy to just kind of tune out after about 5-10 minutes. And so if you plan on doing that, I just want you to get this one point. The main thrust of the book of Hebrews. Let's see if this is working. Okay. This is my title, The Supremacy of Yeshua, which is what Hebrews is dealing with. I know I actually go verse by verse, and it looks scary that we're going to do Hebrews 1:1 through 2:4, but I promise you we're going to skim over quite a bit. It's not going to be that long. But the main point is the Jewish Messiah is better than the Jewish religious system. And what I mean by Jewish religious system, we're dealing with the Levitical system at that time. We're dealing with a system that rejected Yeshua as a Messiah. And he's saying, don't go back. Don't reject Yeshua because of persecution. He is greater. And he's going to show why. So as we jump in together, let's turn to Hebrews 1:1. Now, if you ever open up a commentary on the book of Hebrews, you're going to realize that there are a lot of preliminary notes, a lot of things in the beginning, because there's a big question mark as to the author of Hebrews. There's a lot of discussion who wrote it, and I'll just tell you right now, I'll save you hours of reading and let you know that we don't know. It's mere speculation. We really don't. They propose that, Luke, Paul, Apollos, Barnabas, all these people may have written it, but I will quote from you from Origen. This is in the 3rd century, in about 200. He states, "But who wrote the Epistle of Hebrews? To be sure, only God knows." So if they didn't know it back then, we're probably not going to figure it out anytime soon. But this doesn't hurt with the inspiration of the scripture, just because we don't know who wrote it. A lot of people tend to think that Paul did, that Paul is the author of it, but that's almost universally rejected, for two big reasons. The first one is, when I was an undergraduate, my professor would always say the joke, first year Greek students, they read the book of 1 John and they think they actually know Greek. And what he meant by that was that just as in English there are different ways of writing, there are different styles, some people are better than others, so you have that in the New Testament. And so, 1 John, the books of John, it's fairly simple Greek. And then you get into Paul, and then you get into Luke, and then Hebrews is just skyrocketed up there. It is very, very good Greek. So, just like if you read a letter from me, and it was mediocre, and then you read some Shakespearean letter that had, beautiful poetry and parallelism, it'd be safe to say I did not write that. So in the same way, Paul probably did not write Hebrews. And the second reason I would say Paul didn't write it is because in Hebrews 2:3, it states, "After the gospel was first spoken to the Lord, it was confirmed to us by those who heard." So he places himself as a third party. The Lord spoke it, people heard it, and then told us. However, in Galatians, which we know was written by Paul, he states, "I neither received the gospel from man, nor was I taught it, but I received it through the revelation of Yeshua the Messiah." So there are some differences there. Either way, the one writing the book of Hebrews has a heart and he has a love for the people who he is writing. The audience is going through a tough time. They're going through persecution. They're wavering on their faith. He's saying you guys should be much further along than you actually are. And so he's writing to them more in a pastoral type of tone. So think of this not as just a letter, but it's like a pastor pouring out his heart to his congregation. So I'll read the first sentence. If you have a Bible, follow along with me. If you have a phone or an app and you're not tempted to go on Facebook, follow along with me on there. He states, "God, after he spoke long ago to the fathers in the prophets in many portions and in many ways, in these last days he has spoken to us in his Son." Now, one of the hard things about the Greek language is that word order doesn't matter. So you always have to figure out what complements what, and how do you know your subject, your object? It's always by the things that are placed at the end. But one thing that Greek authors do is the thing they want to emphasize, they'll place at the beginning. So let's say I went to Walmart today, and I want to let you know that, but I want you to focus on Walmart. I would write to you in Greek, "Walmart, I went there today." I don't want you to focus on me. I don't want you to focus on how I got there. I want you to focus on Walmart. And in the same way, the way the Greek is here, it starts many portions and many ways God previously spoke to our fathers through the prophets. So he's focusing on this many portions and many ways. Now, what does that actually mean? The many portions, it indicates consisting of many parts. And we know that no one person in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible, was given the full revelation, right? Let's think of Messianic prophecy, for example. We have in the patriarchal time, Genesis 49, where it says that the Messiah is going to come from the line of Judah. We have with Moses, the fact that he's going to speak with God face to face in Deuteronomy 18. We have with David that he's going to sit on the throne forever in 2 Samuel. Micah, he's going to be born in Bethlehem. You have all these different prophets giving pieces of who the Messiah is going to be. You have many different portions, and you have many different ways. Different means. We could all name them off. visions, dreams, audible voices, writing on walls, things like that. So the author is saying many different portions, many different people, through many different means, were the prophet spoke to our fathers, who's not Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, it's the ancestry of the Jewish people, who spoke to our fathers, but now we have the Son in verse 2. And there's a contrast being made. If you read verse 1 and verse 2, he's saying, God spoke long ago, but in these last days. He spoke to our fathers, now he speaks to us. But the biggest contrast is many portions, many ways, and now we have the Son. He is setting Messiah up as the final prophet. We have the final revelation. Why on earth would you go back to something else? We have the final prophet. And this brings to mind, when we look at Moses, people revere Moses because of his work and the way God used him. And Moses spoke with God face to face. And in Deuteronomy 18, it says that there's going to be one who's going to rise up. The Lord's going to raise up a prophet like Moses, and he's going to put his words in his mouth. And the Torah ends with, no one has come like Moses. Who is this one? Who is this prophet that's going to redeem Israel again, bring them out of exile, be a mediator for the nation? Well, we have the final prophet. It's Yeshua. And that's the way he's setting it up. So in order to illustrate this, I was looking on the internet, and I found this wonderful photo that I'm sure some of you may have seen. And about 15 years ago, he would have been living it up. He had all the technology there was. You can see he has VHS tapes down here. He has a camera. He has a telephone. He has music. So you can look at this and say many different portions, many different ways. That's how we were listening to technology. But now we have the final revelation. We have it all in one. So why would you go back? And in the same way, to a much greater scale, we have these prophets, and what they said was extremely significant. It's not like it's done away with, but now we have the final prophet. Why would you want to abandon him? So I will take this off. I don't mean to compare an iPhone to Yeshua, but it's for the sake of illustration. And so we have the final prophet, but guess what? He's so much more. And the author of Hebrews is about to go into depth about the substance of who Jesus is. Before we get into that, very, very quickly, I'm sure most of us know this, but the question of Son of God. I remember hearing a debate regarding Muslim evangelism, whether they should take out that notion Son of God because it miscommunicates it. When Hannah and I, when we want to take a break, just kind of relax, we put on a movie. And a couple of months ago, we put on the 1997 Walt Disney version of Hercules. And I'm sure if anyone has seen it, I don't know. But the story is you have Zeus, who's the father, and he has a biological son, Hercules. And so they're talking, and they're hitting each other on the arm, talking about sports and things like that. That is not what is meant by Son of God in the Old Testament. It is not that God had a biological son and then he came down to earth or anything like that. When you look in the Hebrew Bible, the notion of sonship is laden with messianic expectation. So you think about Israel. They're called the Son of God, and they're supposed to be a light to the nation. And you think about David, the son of David, he's supposed to sit on the throne forever. And we know it's not Solomon because the throne was taken away from him. And then we have the Son of Man from the vision of Daniel who's sitting at the right hand of God the Father. The notion of son is so clear that when Jesus comes and he says that he is the Son of God, they knew what he meant. He's equating himself with God. So the notion of son is important to understand. I'm sure some of you are familiar with Daniel Boyarin's book. Daniel Boyarin is a leading Talmudist. He's not a believer in Yeshua, but he wrote the Jewish Gospels. And he fights for the claim that belief in a divine Messiah was actually very acceptable in the first century. And he states, Son of God refers to the King of Israel, the earthly King of David's seat, while Son of Man referred to a heavenly figure, not human at all. And so we have Yeshua, the Messiah, coming and fulfilling all of these roles. So the notion that the author is comparing prophets to the Son is like saying servants to the King. It is a huge contrast. So he begins to describe him. In these last days, he spoke to us in his Son, whom he appointed first heir of all things. This again brings back the notion not only of sonship, but Psalm 2, a messianic psalm, where it states, I will surely tell the decree that he said to me, you are my son, today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will surely give the nations as your inheritance. He is the heir of all things. He's the Son of God, the one who inherits all. Second, through whom he made the world. Now, the notion that Yeshua was involved in making the world is not unique to the book of Hebrews. We have in Colossians when it states, the firstborn of all creation, for by him all things were created. But to a first century Jewish mindset, this would have been mind-blowing. The notion that the one who was walking with us X amount of years ago was involved in the creation of the world equates him with God. We have in Psalm 33 verse 6, by the word of the Lord, the Yud He Vav He, the name of God, by the word of the Lord, the heavens were made, and by the breath of his mouth, all of their hosts. In the book, Every Man's Talmud, it states, it follows then that everything in the universe must have been created and could not have existed like God without beginning. The notion that the Son is involved in the creation of the world equates him with God. He is so much more than a prophet, not only the final prophet, but he is God in the flesh. The third thing that he states, through whom he made the world, and then he states, and he is the radiance of his glory. Now you could imagine a silent objector in the crowd. You see this with Paul when he says, who are you, O man, to answer back to God, things like that. He's kind of expecting someone to open their mouth and object. And this probably is what the author's doing here. You know, he states that Yeshua was involved in creating the world. Someone may object, what are you talking about? How is that possible? And he goes on to explain, Yeshua is the exact substance of God. He states, and he is the radiance of his glory. The term radiance is brightness from a source. So just like you have the sun and the moon reflects the brightness of the sun, so we have the S-O-N, the Son of God, who reflects the glory of our Father in heaven. And I believe this also identifies him with Moses. Remember, Moses, he sees the back of God and his face shown. And so now we have the final prophet who is the exact representation of his glory. He states that the exact representation of his nature. If you guys want to learn some Greek, I have a very, very fun word. If you could say it with me. Character. Right? We get character from it. Kind of easy to remember. So we get character, and that's the representation of God's glory. He's his very character when he came on earth. The actual term, it means engraver, one who mints coins. He is the exact image. Not only is he the radiance of his glory, not only does he represent God, but he is the exact nature and substance of God. And then, when we look in the Hebrew Bible, and we just read this verse before, so it's very interesting. When we look in the Hebrew Bible, the tabernacle is so significant. And the purpose of the tabernacle is given in Exodus 25. It states, let them construct a sanctuary for me that I may dwell among them. The God of the universe wanted to dwell among the children of Israel, and that's where they meant in the sanctuary. And then when you get to the New Testament, you have John 1:14. We read it before, and it states, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And the word for dwelt is the same root as tabernacle. The one who you went to go meet in the tabernacle has now come and tabernacled among us. This is the Son. He has come down in order to have fellowship with us. And then finally, he finishes and he says, he upholds all things by the word of his power, which was a known expression coming from Jeremiah 51:15. It is he who made the earth by his power, who established the world by his wisdom and by his understanding. So, many portions, many ways, we had many prophets throughout history, but now we have the Son. And the Son is so much more than just the final prophet. He is God in the flesh. He is God coming down to dwell among us. So the first point we have, final prophet. And then we read, in middle of verse 3, it states, when he made purification for sins. And the term purification used 7 times, and it's mostly in terms of the ceremonial process in the temple, when you would be cleansed. And here, the author of Hebrews is saying, when he made the purification for sins, the once for all. Not only do we have the final prophet, we have the final priest. We have the one we have been looking forward to. When he made purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. We have the final king. We have the final prophet, the final priest, and the final king. Why would you ever want to go back? Why would you want to abandon Yeshua as our Messiah? He's the one we have been waiting for. There's a lot of discussion as to why Majesty on high, why that title. Some people say they didn't want to use God's name in vain. And it's true that that's one of the things, according to Judaism, that will keep you out of the world to come. However, I think it's merely just saying his glory, his location, the fact that we have the Son sitting at the right hand of the one on high. That is the ultimate equality. According to one commentator, to sit at God's right hand is therefore to share in his power without limitation. So I spent a lot of time on this because you have the final prophet, the final priest, and the final king. And these are the three pillars that make up the rest of the book of Hebrews. That the author is going to go into why Jesus brought in a better covenant. He's going to go into why the Melchizedekian system is better than the Levitical one. He's going to go into how we should live with the fact that Jesus is on the throne. So this really sets the tone for the rest of the book. But you could just imagine, as they're reading this out loud, the people are struggling with their faith, how much is embedded just in these 4 verses. It is very, very rich. Now, we're going to actually get into one of the points in verse 4. And what we see here is that the author is going to begin contrasting Yeshua, the Son, with angels. And there's a lot of questions why angels. Some have said because we know that in Colossians they're worshiping angels, so maybe they're worshiping angels here too, but you really don't see any of that in the book of Hebrews, and you don't see that in the culture. They were not worshiping angels. Angels were an extremely significant part of Judaism. According to Every Man's Talmud, again, it says the Qumran community developed a system of protection against demonic threat, and association with angels was one of those ways. They were very dependent on them. And they were very revered because not only were they in the presence of God, but they were instrumental in helping people, in preserving people, and giving physical aid and things like that. But I think the biggest reason angels are brought up here is because of their revelatory function. It's because of how they were used at Mount Sinai. According to Deuteronomy 3 and Psalm 68, it says that the angels were also there when God was giving his Torah to Moses. And we have in Galatians 3 and in Acts 7 the notion that Paul and the New Testament authors support that. And they say the angels were present. And of course there's debate, well, is that just tradition or is that really what happened? But I believe that's what the author of Hebrews is going on. He's speaking about angels revealing the law in comparison to the Son revealing the new covenant. Because again, he's setting up the Son as the final prophet. So he states, having become as much better than the angels as he has inherited a more excellent name than they. And the notion of a better name comes from the Davidic covenant when he says, I will make you a great name like the great ones on the earth before. Now, if you actually look in in your Bible, sorry, mine's a little unbounded. But if you look in your Bible, you're going to see there's a lot of quotations from the Old Testament at this point. And the way that the author of the book of Hebrews uses the Old Testament is very, very interesting. It's very creative. But we're not going to go into, well, how specifically is he using it here or there? What was the original context? Essentially, what he's doing is he's proving from the Hebrew Bible why Messiah is superior to angels. And so he begins in verse 5. For to which of the angels did he ever say, you are my son, today I have begotten you, from Psalm 2, a messianic psalm. And again, I will be a father to him, and he shall be a son to me. And then in verse 6, and when he again brings the firstborn into the world, so the return of Messiah, and let all the angels of God worship him. So he opens up and he says, to which of the angels did God give these messianic prophecies? That he would sit at God's right hand, that he would be an equal. The notion that when he returns, people will worship him. And the implied answer is none. Has anyone here seen Fiddler on the Roof? I would hope so. Okay. We all know that the very, very fun scene where Tevye, he's kind of debating a point, whether his daughter should marry this person or that person. And he says, on the one hand, on the other hand, then on the other hand. And he's going back and forth and he's debating it. And that's essentially what the author of Hebrews does here through the language, but he's not debating it. He's saying from verse 7 to verse 8, he goes, on the one hand, the angels, he says, who makes his angels winds and his ministers a flame of fire. On the one hand, we have angels who are ministers, who are servants. But then on the other hand, in verse 8, your throne, O God, is forever and ever, and the righteous scepter is the scepter of his kingdom. On the one hand, we have angels who are servants. On the other hand, we have God himself. The scales are tilted. Of course, the Son is superior. Not only does he speak about his reign in verse 8, but then in verse 10 through 12, he says, you lay the foundation of the earth. You will never perish. He is eternal. And that you are the same forever. You will never change. He is never changing. He's immutable. Now, if anyone has ever made the accusation against your belief in Yeshua that, no, it was really in 325 at the Nicene Creed. That's at the Nicene Council. That's where they made Jesus God. It wasn't before then. He never meant to be like that. Read the book of Hebrews. Because if this is not true, it is ultimate blasphemy. But if it is true, this is the one who deserves our worship and our dedication. We have the final prophet, the one who's going to reveal everything. We have the final priest who made the sacrifice and the final king. And so he finishes verse 13. But to which of the angels has he said, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet? And this comes from Psalm 110, which, fun fact, is the most quoted psalm in the New Testament. So this is a bookend. Verse 5, to which of the angels did he say? Verse 13, to which of the angels did he say? And the implied answer to both is none. We have the final revelation. Why would you go back? And he's not necessarily putting down angels, but in comparison to the Messiah, he's saying he is so much greater. Verse 14, he says, are they not all ministering spirits sent out to render service for the sake of those who will inherit salvation? And again, the notion of angels is actually very important. Their function, they delivered God's messages, announced the law, gave physical protection, encouragement, direction, provision, and so on. I can give you the notes of this later. For the verses, they were very, very significant. But in comparison to what they revealed, we have the final prophet. Why would you ever want to abandon him? Why would you want to go back? And then we jump to our conclusion. Now, as most of you know, the verses in the Bible and the chapter titles are not inspired. They were included in about the 13th century, and the running joke is that the person who wrote them in was actually on a riding horse because they're so poorly separated. Probably not true, but you know when you're reading the book of Philippians or Ephesians and then chapter 4 starts with therefore, it's a very weird place to put a chapter title because he's making the conclusion of his whole point. So if you read 2 verses a day, if that's kind of your strategy, just be careful it's more important to follow the flow of thought of the author versus the chapter titles. And this is a case right here. He begins in Hebrews 2:1, for this reason, i.e., therefore. And this is our conclusion. For this reason, we must pay much closer attention to what we have heard so that we do not drift away from it. Now, this is not advice for your best life now. The way this is set up is it's a command. We need to pay attention. And what that actually means is to be intent on. And it's using, the way it's used is about like a ship going into a port. It's being firm in something. It's not just allowing any thought to come in. We must pay much closer attention. The way that the Greek is set up here is it's not just a one-time event, it's a continuous thing. One of the sports I really enjoy playing is squash. If anyone here has ever even heard of it, probably not, but it's like racquetball. So you're in a box with another person and you're hitting a ball against a wall essentially. And I started playing it a couple of years ago, and for the first 6 or 7 months I just kept losing. I couldn't get better. They were much greater than I was, and so Hannah graciously got me some squash lessons. And I remember I went into the squash court with the squash teacher, and he showed me the exact form I needed in order to hit the ball straight down the wall. Now, when I got that form and I hit it once and I got that perfect shot, do you think I said, oh, okay, I'm done. I'm a great squash player now? No, because my next 50 ones were way off. What I needed was to go over and over and over and get that muscle memory. So when I'm in the midst of the game, I can hit that perfect shot and make the point. In the same way, it's not, oh, I'm so glad I read the book of Exodus, I'm done. No, it's continuously pursuing, going after the salvation which was given to us, pursuing our Lord and understanding Him more. For this reason, we must pay much closer attention to what we have heard so that we do not drift away. And the term for drift away, it's used for water going down a river. It's just kind of like a boat passing off into the end. And unfortunately, this happens frequently. I just got an email this week about someone at my home congregation in Montreal who was with them for a year and a half doing evangelism, and now she has left the faith. It's thank you very much. I appreciate that. So, he's instructing them. We have the final prophet, the final priest, the final king. What he is saying, we must listen to him. Therefore, pay close attention. Don't just simply take in everything else that other people are saying. Pay close attention to what you have heard so you don't fall away. And then in verse 2 through verse 3, he uses it's a midrashic argument most of us are familiar with, the Kal Vachomer, from a minor to a major premise. And Jesus uses this to give you an example. In Matthew 7, he states, if you then, being evil, know how to give food and gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven be able to give it to you? So you could think of this argument as a how much more. If this is true, how much more is that true? And that's the argument he uses here. He says in verse 2, for if the word spoken through angels, so the Mosaic law, if it was unalterable and every transgression received a just penalty, if you were going to be punished for disobeying it, how much more should you listen to the final prophet? How much more should you listen to the final revelation and follow him? And he states, how will we escape if we neglect so great a salvation? And the term so great is like to be negligent, is to be careless about it. Do we care about our salvation, or is it a get out of hell free card? Do we care about the Messiah who has given it to us? And this is the point he's getting at. We have the final revelation. Pursue him. Continue to pursue him. And then he ends in verse 3 and verse 4, and he states, after it was first spoken through the Lord, that's number 1, it was confirmed to us by those who heard, number 2, God also testifying with them by both signs and wonders and various miracles and gifts, that's 3. And most of us know Deuteronomy 19:15, on the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses, a matter shall be confirmed. He is saying it's not up for debate. We have the final revelation. Why on earth would you leave? Continue staying close to the Word of God. And so, imagine, I'm here and I have an Apple computer, and I'm preaching from an iPad, and I do have an iPhone, and I'm very taken by advertisements, I guess, for Apple. But imagine I sent you an email, and I said, you know what, I'm kind of tired of this. Why don't you come with me? We're going to go to the store. I'm going to get some VHS tapes, some floppy disks, a Walkman. You would probably write back and say, no, we're much more advanced than that. We don't need to go back to that. And in the same way, this is what the author is saying. You don't need to go back to a system that rejects Yeshua as a Messiah. You have the final revelation. Stay with it. Continue pursuing it. So by way of application, a couple of questions. Number 1, do other things look more appealing than the Messiah? I said that the point of this is that the Jewish Messiah is better than the Jewish religious system, but we could replace Jewish religious system with anything. Whether it's acceptance, it's money, anything like that. What is more attractive to us than the Jewish Messiah? Because if there is anything, this book is for us to read. When I gave my life to the Lord in the summer of 2004, I was in the 9th grade going into the 10th grade, and I went back to school. I was rejected by most of my friends, most of the crowd I was with, and I had to make a decision. Is the Jewish Messiah better than acceptance? And while it was difficult at that time, absolutely yes. So, do other things look more appealing than the Messiah? 2, are we paying close attention to and pursuing him? Just like he says, pay close attention so you don't drift away. Are we doing that? And I'll tell you right now, when I was speaking with the anti-missionary, I could tell you that one of the reasons it got so bad was because as he was casting doubt on the scriptures I was studying, I started to be like, you know what, I'll be more objective about this. I'm not going to read the scriptures. I'm just going to kind of deal with this on a more academic level. And as I spent time away from the Lord, I began to drift away. And that's exactly what happened. Are we staying close? Does he have our attention? Are we pursuing him? One of the things that has helped me is a Bible reading plan. It is broken up by chapters, so it's a little hard. But get on a Bible reading plan. Stay close to the Word. And third, God is not a spare tire. And what do I mean by that? Hannah and I, we were south of Dallas a couple of months ago when we were leaving our friend's house. And it was nighttime out. And as we were walking to our car, it looked like this, which was not good. It had a flat tire. And I'll tell you right then, I was so happy I had a spare tire in my trunk. The thing is, when I don't have a flat tire, I don't even think about that spare tire. I couldn't care less about it. So is God a spare tire to us? When we need him, we are on our knees, we are after him. But when we don't, we're okay. We don't need to spend time in the Word. I would encourage you, continue to pursue our salvation. I don't mean earning the salvation. I mean pursuing the one who gave it to us. The final prophet, the final priest, the final king. We have the revelation. So remember, the Jewish Messiah is better than the Jewish religious system. Shabbat Shalom.
For more information, visit us at www.etzheim.org. That's spelled EITZ-CHAIM.org. Or join us in Richardson, Texas for our weekly Shabbat services.